The chapel sat in a part of the hospital that didn't belong to anyone in particular. I worked overnight materials transport, which meant moving linens, supplies, and empty equipment between floors. It also meant I knew the service corridors, loading areas, and forgotten corners of the hospital better than most people who worked there. Not radiology's hallway, not quite the lobbies either. Just this leftover stretch of tile between the elevators and the loading dock doors, where the air always ran a few degrees colder than it should. I noticed the cold first, before anything else. It wasn't the kind that came from a vent. It sat low, around the ankles, the way it does in a root cellar, and it didn't care what the thermostat said. The door was open that morning, just a crack, the way it usually got left. Inside, 4 rows of benches faced a little shelf with a cross on it and a row of electric candles that buzzed faintly if you stood close enough. 3 of them were dark. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that somebody needed to get on top of those batteries before a family walked in here looking for light and got none. What stopped me wasn't the candles, though. It was the kneeler. The cushion ran the length of the front bench, red vinyl gone thin and shiny in the middle from years of knees pressing into it. That morning it had a dent in it I didn't like the look of, deep, centered, like something heavier than a person had been kneeling there, and kneeling there a long time. The fabric around the edges had pulled tight, the way upholstery does right before it splits. I crouched down and put my hand flat on it without really deciding to. Cold. Colder than the floor even. And there was a smell underneath the candle wax and the carpet cleaner they used in there. Something wet and low, like a basement that floods every spring whether anybody wants it to or not. I didn't touch it again after that. The benches were off too, just slightly. Each one nudged a few inches out of line with the one behind it, like someone had shoved past them in a hurry without bothering to straighten anything. I lined the first one back up with my boot, more out of habit than anything, and when I turned to do the second one, the candle nearest the door clicked back on by itself. I stood there a second longer than I needed to. It wasn't enough to scare anybody. Batteries die. They sometimes come back to life on a loose connection. Candles flicker. Kneelers wear down. None of that is strange on its own in a building this size, this old, running this many hours a day without a real break. I'd seen weirder things come out of equipment that had nothing wrong with it but bad luck and bad wiring. What got under my skin wasn't any one thing. It was how none of it added up to an explanation, even a bad one. The dent didn't match the candles. The candles didn't match the cold. The cold didn't match a building with central heat running 24 hours a day. Each piece made sense by itself, and none of it made sense together. And that's a different kind of unsettling than any single broken thing. I left the chapel the way I'd found it, mostly. Candles back on, one bench straighter than before, the dent in the cushion still sitting there like a footprint nobody wanted to claim. I told myself somebody'd probably spent the night in there. Some family member too wrecked to make it back to a waiting room chair, gone before the next shift came through. People do that. Grief makes you fold yourself into strange shapes in strange places, and nobody questions a chapel for holding somebody's weight at 4 in the morning. It wasn't until I was halfway down the hall, cartwheel ticking its same broken rhythm, that I noticed the carpet by the door. A thin trail of something dark, not blood. Not quite anything I had a name for, leading from the threshold a few feet into the hallway before it just stopped. Like whatever made it had been carried that far and set down, or had dragged itself that far and gotten up and walked the rest of the way clean. I didn't follow it. I want to say that was instinct, some old animal part of me clocking danger before my brain caught up, but honestly it was simpler than that. I had 4 more floors to cover before shift change, a cart half-loaded, and a headache starting behind my left eye from too much bad coffee and not enough sleep. Whatever that trail was could wait for daylight, for somebody whose job it actually was to worry about stains on hospital carpet. So I kept moving. The hallway swallowed the sound of the cart the way it always did at that hour, like the building itself was holding its breath along with me, waiting to see what I'd do with what I'd just seen. I didn't do anything. Not that night. By the time I made it back around to that end of the building, the stain was gone. Not cleaned up. Gone, like it had never been there. The carpet dry and flat and exactly the color it always was. I stood over the spot longer than I should have, looking for some edge of it, some shadow where the fibers might still be a shade darker, and found nothing. Housekeeping didn't run a crew through there until 6. I knew that schedule better than my own. I almost let it go. Almost. Loretta caught me standing there and asked if I'd lost something. I told her no, just checking the floor, which was a stupid thing to say, and she knew it, but she didn't push. She had a patient in 214 who'd pulled his IV out twice already that shift, and her patience for anything that wasn't bleeding was thin. "Denny was back there an hour ago," she said, nodding toward the chapel. "Said the door was locked, from the inside." "That door doesn't lock." That's what he said too. She shrugged like the whole thing was somebody else's problem, which, to be fair, it was. Said he had to put his shoulder into it before it gave. I went and looked at the door myself on my next pass. There was no lock on it, never had been, just a little turn latch that didn't even catch right half the time. I tried it a dozen ways and it opened every single time. Easy, like it always had. I told myself Denny probably just hit it wrong, hit the frame instead of the door, made something simple feel stuck. People do that all the time, especially at 4 in the morning when their brain's running on fumes. I found Denny down by the loading dock a little later, drinking a Mountain Dew like it was coffee, his flashlight clipped to his belt, and his radio turned up loud enough that I could hear the static from 10 feet off. "You really put your shoulder into that door?" I asked. "Wasn't playing around, man." He didn't look up right away, which wasn't like him. Denny liked an audience. Felt like somebody had it braced from the other side. "I'm serious, my shoulder's still sore. There's nothing in there to brace a door with." I know what I felt. He finally looked at me, and there wasn't any joke behind it this time. No setup for a punchline about wolves or ghosts. "And there's a smell in there now. You smell it?" I had. I just hadn't wanted to say it out loud yet, like naming it would make it more real than it already was. Wet earth. Something gone slightly sour underneath. The kind of smell that comes off meat left out too long, except fainter, like it was bleeding through a wall instead of sitting right in front of you. "Probably a pipe," I said. "Something backed up under the floor." Sure, he didn't believe it either. Neither did I, really. But it was easier to say than the alternative, which was nothing. No explanation at all. Just a smell and a door that didn't locking itself shut on a grown man twice Denny's size. I went and got Father Ridley a little after that, mostly because I didn't know who else to bring it to, and partly because I figured if anybody was going to tell me I was making something out of nothing, it'd be a man whose whole job was finding meaning in empty rooms. He was up. He always seemed to be up no matter the hour, like sleep was something he'd negotiated his way out of years ago. He didn't say much walking down, just listened while I laid it out, the dent, the candles, the smell, Denny and the door. When we got there, he stood in the doorway a second before going in, the way you'd pause before stepping into water you weren't sure was cold. "It's colder in here than the hallway," he said. "I know." He walked the length of the room slow, touched the edge of the kneeler without kneeling, looked at the candles, which were all lit now, every single one, burning steady like nothing had ever been wrong with them. He didn't touch those either. "People feel things in chapels," he said finally, like he was trying the words out before deciding whether to keep them. "It's the nature of the room. Grief leaves a residue sometimes. I wouldn't read too much into a few candles." "And the door?" He didn't answer that one right away. He looked at the latch a long moment, turned it once, watched it catch on nothing and swing free, the same as it had for me. "I'll say a prayer over the room before my rounds tonight," he said. "Sometimes that settles things." It wasn't really an answer, and I think we both knew it. But I let it sit there unanswered, same as everything else that morning, because the alternative was admitting out loud that something in that little room had started keeping its own hours, separate from the rest of the hospital, and none of us were ready to say that yet. Not Denny, not me, and especially not the man whose job it was to believe in things nobody else could see, and who'd just spent a full minute standing very still in a doorway, looking like he already half did. Father Ridley said his prayer that night, and by the next morning everybody had a different story about what happened while he was in there, which was the first time I really understood how bad this was going to get. Not because of what was in the chapel, but because of how fast people stopped agreeing on anything close to it. Loretta said she walked past around 2 and saw him through the cracked door, kneeling, head down. Nothing strange about it at all. Denny said he was standing watch outside the whole time and never saw the door crack open once. Said Ridley went in and didn't come out for almost 40 minutes. Door shut tight the entire time. No light leaking out from underneath it, even though every candle in there was supposedly lit. The two of them argued about it at the nurse's station like it actually mattered who was right, like the truth was sitting right there waiting to be claimed. I didn't say anything. I'd seen Ridley myself around 2:15 in the cafeteria, getting coffee nowhere near the chapel. When I told him that later, he just looked at me for a second too long and said he didn't remember the cafeteria at all that night. Said his whole memory of those 40 minutes was the chapel, the cold, the sound of his own voice saying words he'd said 1,000 times before, and somewhere in there a gap he couldn't account for, like a few minutes had been lifted clean out of the middle of his prayer. You don't remember getting coffee. I remember telling you I was going to get coffee. He rubbed his eyes like the conversation was making him tired in a way that had nothing to do with hours slept. I don't remember actually doing it. That should have scared me more than it did. I think by then I'd already started sorting things into 2 piles without meaning to. The stuff that was strange but survivable, and the stuff I wasn't ready to put a name to yet. Ridley's missing 20 minutes went in the first pile, mostly because the alternative felt like more than I could carry on top of a double shift. It was Erlene who finally said the thing nobody else wanted to. I'd seen her around for weeks by then. This small woman who never seemed to leave, always in the same gray cardigan, always parked in the chapel some hour of the night when her husband's monitors in 318 finally let her step away. She wasn't there for any of the noise everybody else was making. She didn't care about doors or candles or who saw what. She just wanted somewhere quiet to sit with what was happening to her husband, and the chapel had been that for her, right up until it wasn't. I found her in the hallway outside it one morning, sitting on the bench they kept out there for people who needed a minute before going back in, her hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone pale. I'm not going back in tonight, she said, before I'd even asked if she was all right. Something happen? Something's already been happening. I just finally let myself notice it. She looked up at me, and there wasn't any panic in her face, which somehow made it worse. Just tired certainty, the kind that comes from someone who's spent too many nights sitting with worse things than fear and has stopped having room for politeness about it. There's a smell in there some nights, not every night, and the air moves wrong, right before it shows up. Like something big just walked past you, except there's nothing there to walk. Did you see anything? I saw the kneeler cushion sink down right in front of me, like somebody just dropped onto it, and there wasn't a soul in that room but me. She said it plain. No shake in her voice at all, like she'd already decided there was no use being afraid of something that wasn't going to be talked out of being real. I prayed through it. I've buried 2 children and a sister, young man. I wasn't about to run from a chair cushion. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything, and she didn't seem to need me to. What stuck with me wasn't the cushion, or the smell, or even the air moving wrong. It was that her story didn't match Denny's, and Denny's didn't match Loretta's, and Ridley's missing 20 minutes didn't match either of theirs, and every single one of them was describing the same 40 square feet of carpet and prayer candles, like they'd each wandered into a slightly different room. I asked Denny to pull the hallway camera footage later that morning, the one that covered the chapel door. He complained about needing a reason for the report, but by then he wanted an answer as badly as I did. We wanted one piece of solid ground under all those mismatched stories. The footage from 2 to 2:40 was just static, clean on either side of it. Nothing wrong with the camera before or after. No maintenance ticket. No power blip logged anywhere in the building that night. 40 minutes of nothing but gray noise. The exact same stretch of time Ridley couldn't account for. The exact same window Denny swore the door never opened, and Loretta swore she saw him praying through a gap that, according to the tape, didn't exist either way. I stood in that little security office a long time watching static loop on a screen, and for the first time since the cushion, I let myself think the word I'd been avoiding. Not out loud. just enough to feel the shape of it sitting in my chest, heavy and cold, the same temperature as that room. It started as a sound, the way most of it had started as something small enough to argue away. 3 nights after the camera footage, I was down on the loading dock end of the hall, dropping off a stack of folded linens that needed to go up to 4, when I heard something moving on the floor above me. Not footsteps exactly, more like something dragging itself in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a weight shifting from one side to the other, the kind of sound a heavy door makes when somebody's leaning their whole body into pushing it open an inch at a time. I stopped and looked up at the ceiling tiles like that would tell me anything. The chapel was directly below that stretch of hallway on 2, not above it. I knew the building's bones well enough by then to be sure of that. So whatever was making that sound up on the 2nd floor had nothing to do with the room everybody'd been losing sleep over. That's what I told myself anyway, standing there with an armful of linens going slightly damp from my own hands. I went up to check it out because that's what you do, you go look, even when some part of you would rather not. Floor 2 was quiet when I got there. Not hospital quiet, which still has machines humming and call lights blinking somewhere. Actually quiet, the kind where you can hear your own pulse if you stand still enough. I walked the length of the hall and found nothing. No cart left somewhere it shouldn't be. No maintenance door propped open. Nothing dragging or sliding or settling. I figured it was pipes. Old building, old pipes, and pipes complain in 100 different voices depending on the weather and the water pressure, and a dozen things nobody bothers to track. That was the explanation I carried with me back down to the 1st floor, and it held up fine right until I got close to the chapel again and heard the same sound. Except now it was coming from inside the room itself, low and slow, that same dragging weight shifting side to side. I stood outside the cracked door and listened longer than I want to admit. It moved. That's the part that finally got under whatever was left of my skin that night. It wasn't a fixed sound, coming from one spot the way a bad pipe or a loose vent would. It crossed the room while I listened, started over by the candle shelf, moved toward the kneeler, paused there a long moment, then drifted toward the back corner where the coats and umbrellas got left during bad weather. Each shift in position came with this faint scrape, like something heavy was being set down and picked back up, set down and picked back up, working its way across the floor with no hurry at all, like it had all the time in the world and knew I was standing right outside the door, listening to every second of it. I didn't go in. I want to be honest about that, because for a long time after, I told myself I would have gone in if it had really mattered, if somebody's life had actually been on the line right then. But nobody was in there. Erlene had stopped coming at night. Nobody was in danger from that room except whoever was foolish enough to open the door and ask it to prove itself. So I just listened, my back against the wall across the hall, until the sound stopped the same way it had every time before, all at once, mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on it rather than letting it finish wherever it was headed. I told Loretta about it the next chance I got, and for once she didn't have a quick comeback ready. She just sat there with her coffee going cold in her hand, staring at the chart in front of her without reading a word of it. I heard it too, she finally said, couple nights back. Thought it was something in the vents at first. Did it move for you? It moved. She set the coffee down like it had gone heavy in her hand. Crossed right over my head, near as I could tell. I was at the desk. Sounded like it went from one end of the ceiling to the other, slow, like it was pacing something off, counting steps maybe. I don't know. I'm just telling you what it sounded like. That was new. The idea that it wasn't confined to the chapel anymore. That whatever made that sound could move through the building, not just sit and wait in one small room for people to wander close enough to hear it. I didn't like that idea at all. A contained problem, even a frightening one, is still a problem with edges. This didn't sound like it had any. Denny had heard it differently again. Same as always. Said his version came with a low huffing sound underneath the dragging, like breathing, except too slow and too deep to belong to anything his size. He'd started carrying a flashlight that put out 3 times the light of his standard one. Said he'd bought it himself. Off the books because the hospital's budget for security equipment hadn't accounted for whatever this was turning into. I didn't tell either of them what I'd worked out on my own, walking home that morning with the sun barely up over the tree line behind the parking lot. The sound wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it, a pattern, almost like pacing, like something walking the same stretch of floor over and over, checking the same ground, the way an animal circles territory it considers its own. I didn't have a name for it yet, not one I was ready to say out loud to anybody, not even to myself in the quiet of my own truck with the radio off and the heat barely working. But I knew the shape of what I was thinking, the same way you know a storm's coming before the sky actually does anything about it. That pressure behind your ears, that sense of something building just out of sight, patient and unbothered, content for now just to walk its own ground in the dark and wait for whoever was foolish enough to walk into it. The dogs started it, the strays that hung around the loading dock looking for scraps from the cafeteria dumpsters. There were maybe 4 or 5 of them that came and went, mutts mostly, skinny and used to people enough to not run when you walked past. I'd been feeding one of them on and off for a couple months, a black and tan thing with one ear that never sat right, because something about the routine of it made the end of a long shift feel less like just clocking out into nothing. That morning he wasn't anywhere near the dock. None of them were. I noticed because the quiet was wrong. Not hospital quiet, not chapel quiet. Outside quiet, which I hadn't thought to pay attention to before that night. No barking from the tree line, no rustling in the dumpster, nothing. Even the crows that usually started up around 5, working the parking lot for whatever blew out of people's cars, weren't making a sound. I stood out there a minute with my breath fogging in front of me, looking at the dark line of trees past the lot lights, and got the distinct feeling that I was being watched by something that had no interest in being seen back. I went inside telling myself it was the cold keeping the animals denned up. Nothing more complicated than that. I almost believed it until I got back near the chapel hallway and found the smell waiting for me before I even turned the corner. Thick, low, that same wet earth and something gone wrong smell that had been showing up for weeks, except stronger now, strong enough that I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging on it. The chapel door was open all the way for once. Not just cracked. Every candle was out. Not flickering. Not dim. Dark, all of them, like someone had gone down the row and snuffed each one in turn. I should have turned around right there. I think some part of me knew that even as I kept walking toward it, cart left behind me in the hall, hands empty, which felt wrong in a way I couldn't name, like showing up somewhere important without bringing anything to offer. The room was darker than it should have been, with the hallway light spilling in through the open door. That's the part I still can't make sense of looking back. Light went in. It just didn't seem to go very far, like the dark in there had a thickness to it, was pushing back against anything trying to fill it. I saw the shape before I understood I was seeing anything at all. It was low, in the back corner where the coats hung, folded down in a way that didn't make sense for the size of it. Too much shoulder, too much limb, crammed into a space built for umbrellas and lost and found mittens. The first thing I really registered was the breathing. Slow, deep, with this faint wet catch at the end of every exhale, like something was working harder to breathe than it should have had to. Then it lifted its head, and I caught maybe a third of it in the spill of hallway light. Enough to see the wrongness of the jaw, too long for the face it was attached to, and the eyes, which didn't shine the way you'd expect, didn't catch the light and throw it back gold or green like something out of a hunting documentary. They just sat there, dark and wet-looking and entirely still, fixed on me like I was something it had been waiting on without any particular hurry. I didn't move. I want to say I made some kind of decision in that moment, weighed my options, did something a person's supposed to do when they're staring down whatever that was. The truth is, my body just stopped working the way I asked it to. Legs locked. Breath caught somewhere up high in my chest and refused to come down. It didn't come at me. That's the part that still bothers me more than almost anything else from that whole stretch of time. It just watched, head tilted slightly, the way a dog tilts its head at a sound it can't quite place, like it was curious about me in some distant, unbothered way. Not predator sizing up prey. Not yet. Just something taking stock, filing me away for later. Then slow, it folded itself back down into the corner, Lower than before, shoulders rolling in a way that looked wrong for any spine I knew the shape of, and the dark seemed to thicken around it again until I genuinely couldn't tell where the shape ended and the room began. I don't know how long I stood there after that. Long enough that my legs started shaking on their own, a fine tremor I couldn't will away, and long enough that the candles, every single one, clicked back on at once, throwing soft yellow light across a room that, in that light, held nothing in the back corner at all. Just coats. Just a stack of forgotten umbrellas leaning against the wall. I backed out into the hallway and didn't trust my legs to carry me anywhere for a solid minute. Just stood there with one hand against the wall, waiting for the shaking to settle into something I could walk on. The strangest part of that whole morning, the detail that stuck with me harder than the shape in the corner or the smell or even the eyes, is that somewhere in the middle of all that, with my heart going so hard I could feel it in my teeth, I thought about my coffee. Whether it had gone cold in the cart, whether I'd left the cap loose and it'd be sloshed all over the linens by the time I made it back. I don't have a good explanation for that. I've stopped trying to find one. I kept it to myself for 2 nights, what I'd seen in that corner, mostly because I didn't have words that wouldn't get me sent home on a psych hold. But I started carrying things differently after that, kept to the center of hallways instead of hugging the walls. Counted exits in rooms I'd walked through 1,000 times, without ever once thinking about where I'd run if I had to. Denny noticed before I told him anything. Said I looked like a man who'd seen the thing he'd been joking about for weeks, and when I didn't argue, his face did something I'd never seen it do before. Went still, all the smart-ass drained right out of it. You gonna tell me what it was? I don't have a word for it that's gonna help either of us. He didn't push. I think by then he'd stopped wanting details and started just wanting somebody else to be as scared as he was, which is its own kind of comfort, even if it's a sorry one. It came back for me on a Thursday, down by the loading dock where the hallway necked down to a single lane between 2 rows of supply shelves before opening out onto the bay doors. I was hauling a cart of empty oxygen tanks back for exchange, half my attention on the squeak of one bad wheel, and I didn't hear it behind me until the air changed. That specific thickness, the same one from the chapel, except moving now, coming with me instead of waiting in one place. I turned and it was already too close to run from. It filled that narrow stretch of hallway top to bottom, shoulders scraping the shelving on either side, head low because the ceiling wouldn't let it stand the way it wanted to. I got more of it that time than I had in the chapel. The legs too long and bent wrong at the joint, more like something built for crouching than standing. The patches of hide stretched thin over muscle in some places and bare-looking in others, gray and wrong, like skin that had spent too long underwater. I didn't look at the face. I couldn't make myself. I dropped the cart and ran for the bay doors, and it came after me without hurry, like it already knew the doors were locked for the night and I didn't. They were. I hit the bar and it didn't give, hit it again, and behind me I heard the click of claws, not paws, not boots, something in between, finding purchase on the concrete, closing the distance in 3 strides that should have taken 6. It hit me before I got my hands up. Not a swipe meant to kill. I understand that now, looking back with whatever clear head I've managed to find since. More like a shove, a backhand that caught my shoulder and sent me into the shelving hard enough that a case of saline bags came down on top of both of us. Pain went through my arm in a white sheet, and I felt the wet heat of blood before I felt the actual cut. 4 lines opened clean through my jacket and the skin underneath. I went down. I remember the floor against my cheek, cold the way only hospital tile gets cold, and I remember thinking, with a clarity that still unsettles me, that I didn't want my mother to find out I died on a loading dock floor smelling like spilled saline. It stood over me. I felt the weight of its attention more than I saw it, that low, wet breathing right above my head, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off it, and I waited for whatever came next, the way you wait for a door to finally open after you've heard the knob turn. It didn't come. Somewhere up in the building, faint through 3 floors of concrete and tile, a code alarm started, that flat electronic tone that means somebody's heart just stopped being a heart for a minute, the one that sends half a floor running toward a single room. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times in my years there. I'd never once heard it change the air around me the way it did right then. The breathing above me stopped. I felt it lift away before I understood what was happening, not retreating from me exactly, more like its attention had simply moved somewhere else entirely, the way a person's head turns toward a sound that matters more than whatever's right in front of them. By the time I got enough nerve to roll over, the far service door was swinging slowly on its hinges. I hadn't heard it cross the hallway or force the door open. All that remained was the smell thinning toward the stairwell. I sat against the shelving a long time, pressing my good hand over the cuts in my arm, blood running warm between my fingers, listening to the code alarm finally cut off 3 floors up. Somebody, somewhere in that building, had just stopped breathing on a different floor entirely, in a room I had no reason to know the number of. It wasn't until later, lying in the ER getting 4 stitches from a tech who didn't ask questions because nobody at that hospital asked questions anymore, that the shape of it really landed on me. It hadn't been hunting me at all. Not really. I'd just been standing in its way when something else, somewhere else in that building, had pulled its attention clean off me like a hand turning a dial. I didn't know yet what that meant. I just knew I didn't like the direction my thoughts were headed, toward rooms full of people whose bodies were already starting to let go, and toward a woman in a gray cardigan who spent every night a few doors down from exactly that kind of room. They kept me overnight for observation, which in that building meant a bed in an overflow room nobody used for anything but storage half the time, an IV line I didn't need, and 4 hours of staring at ceiling tiles I knew better than my own bedroom. I checked myself out before the day shift doctor came around, against the advice of a nurse half my age who clearly thought I was an idiot, which, fair enough. My arm throbbed under the bandage the whole walk home. 4 neat lines of stitches that the ER tech had written up as laceration, mechanism unclear, because that's what you write when a grown man tells you he caught it on shelving and you've got 11 other patients waiting and no particular interest in arguing the point. I slept maybe 3 hours before I gave up and just sat at my kitchen table running it all back through my head. The alarm. The way the thing's attention had pulled off me like somebody'd called its name from another room. I didn't know the patient, didn't know the floor even, but I knew the shape of the idea sitting in my chest, and it had Erlene's face on it whether I wanted it there or not. I went in early that night, hours before my shift actually started, and found her in the hallway outside 318 instead of the chapel, sitting in that same gray cardigan with a paperback open on her lap that she wasn't reading. "You're hurt," she said before I'd even sat down across from her. She nodded at my arm without asking what happened, like she already knew better than to want the details. "Long night. They've been getting longer." She closed the book. "Henry's not doing well." The doctors keep using that phrase, "not doing well," like it means something different from what it actually means. She said it without bitterness, just tired clarity, a woman who'd run out of patience for euphemism a long time ago. I asked her, careful as I could manage, if anything strange had happened around her husband's room lately. Sounds, smells, anything. She looked at me a long moment before she answered, like she was deciding how much of herself she was willing to hand over to the question. "There's a cold spot by the window some nights," she said. "Comes and goes. I thought it was a draft at first. The blinds don't even move when it happens, though. And Henry..." She stopped, started again. "Henry's monitor alarms go off sometimes when nothing's actually wrong with him. The nurses come running, find his numbers fine, and leave confused. It's happened 4 times this week. 4 times. I didn't say anything about the chapel, or the loading dock, or the way the thing's head had turned toward an alarm 3 floors up like a dog catching a whistle only it could hear. I didn't need to. Erlene wasn't a woman who needed things spelled out for her. She'd buried 2 children and a sister, she'd told me once, and there was a particular kind of clarity that comes from having already lived through the worst thing you can imagine. You stop needing the universe to make sense. You just start paying very close attention to its patterns instead. "You think it's drawn to him," she said. Not a question. "I don't know what I think. I do." She folded her hands in her lap, knuckles pale the same way they'd been the day she told me about the cushion. "I think it's drawn to the leaving. Not to Henry, not to me. to whatever happens in that gap, right before somebody stops being here and starts being somewhere else. I've sat with enough dying people to know there's a feeling in a room right before it happens. A pressure. Maybe it's not just a feeling. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I'd seen too much by then to insult either of us with that kind of comfort. What she said next is the thing that stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that whole stretch of time. Longer even than the shape in the corner of the chapel, or the weight of it standing over me on that loading dock floor. "I'm not asking you to keep him safe from it," she said. "I gave up asking anybody to keep him safe from anything a long time ago. I'm asking you to tell me, if you can, when it's close, so I can be the one sitting with him, not some nurse who doesn't know him, not some chaplain saying words from a book. Me." Her voice didn't break saying it, which somehow made it worse than if it had. "I've sat through worse than a monster, young man. I just don't want to miss it if this is the night." I told her I'd try. I didn't know yet what trying was going to look like, and some part of me already suspected it was going to cost more than either of us wanted to pay. But I said it anyway, because there wasn't another honest thing to say to a woman who'd already made peace with losing everything, and was only asking to be present for it. Walking back down toward my own end of the building afterward, I passed the chapel door, cracked open same as always, every candle burning steady and undisturbed. I stood there a minute, looking at that quiet little room that had started all of this, and understood for the first time that I'd been thinking about it wrong from the beginning. It wasn't haunting the chapel. The chapel was just where it waited, between feedings, in the one room in the whole building built specifically to hold people at the exact moment they were closest to letting go of everything. I didn't sleep again that day. I kept thinking about Henry's monitor going off for no reason, 4 times in 1 week, and about something patient enough to wait in a closet full of umbrellas for its turn to come around again. Henry died on a Tuesday, a little after 3 in the morning, and I knew it before anybody told me, because I was the one pushing a cart of clean linens past 318 when the air in that hallway went thick and cold all at once, the way it had in the chapel, the way it had on the loading dock floor. I dropped the cart in the middle of the hall and ran. Erlene was already inside when I got there, sitting close to the bed, holding Henry's hand like she'd been holding it for years and didn't intend to stop now that it mattered most. The monitor beside him was flatlining, that long single tone I'd heard 100 times in that building and never once gotten used to. Nobody had hit the code button yet. I think some part of her wanted those last seconds to belong to just the two of them, before the room filled up with strangers doing their jobs. That's when I saw it, in the corner by the window, lower than the bed rail, folded down the way it had been folded into the coat closet, except closer now, closer than it had ever let itself get with witnesses around. Like Henry's leaving had pulled it right up to the edge of the bed without it caring anymore who saw. Erlene saw it too. I watched her see it, watched her face do something I wasn't expecting. Not fear, not the scream I'd have bet on if you'd asked me an hour before. Something closer to recognition, like she'd been preparing for this exact meeting longer than I'd known her. "You don't get him," she said, quiet, not to me. It lifted its head at the sound of her voice, slow the way it had lifted its head at me in the chapel. That same unhurried curiosity, except there was something underneath it now I hadn't seen before, a kind of patience running thin, like a held breath about to let go. I didn't think. I grabbed the rolling vital signs cart by the door and shoved it hard into the space between the bed and the window. More noise than weapon, just trying to put something solid between Erlene and whatever was about to happen. It barely flinched. A clawed hand, I still don't have a better word for it even now, came down on the cart and folded the metal frame like it was a tray table, sent the whole thing skidding into the wall in a shower of broken plastic and spilled saline bags. It came up to full height then, as much as the room would let it, head nearly brushing the ceiling tiles, and I finally saw the whole shape of it at once for the first time. Too much of it to hold on to, joints bent in directions that didn't belong to anything I had a name for, hide stretched thin over muscle that moved wrong, too fluid, like something underneath was working harder than skin was built to hide. Erlene didn't move from Henry's side. That's the part I still don't fully understand, even now, looking back on it from as much distance as I've managed to put between myself and that room. She just kept holding his hand, like letting go of it for even a second mattered more to her than whatever was about to happen to the rest of her. I got between them. I don't remember deciding to. I remember the cold of it against my back, the smell thick enough to taste and the sound it made low in its chest, not quite a growl, more like something working up the nerve to commit to a decision. It hit me once, open palm, and I went down hard enough to lose a few seconds of the room entirely. Came back to myself on the floor with my ears ringing and a fresh line of pain opening across my collarbone, warm and wet under my shirt. I remember thinking, with a clarity that still embarrasses me, that I'd left my coffee on the cart in the hallway, and it was definitely cold by now, and some part of my brain decided that mattered more than the 400 pounds of something standing over me, deciding whether I was worth finishing. It didn't finish me. It turned back toward the bed instead, toward Henry, toward whatever it had actually come for, and that's when the code alarm finally went off. Not from this room, but down the hall, another room, another body letting go at the exact same moment, like the whole building had chosen that one stretch of minutes to empty itself out all at once. The thing froze. I watched it happen, that same head tilt I'd seen before, attention splitting between two pulls at once, two doors it couldn't be behind at the same time. For one long second it didn't move at all, caught between Henry's bed and whatever was happening 3 rooms down. And in that second I understood something I hadn't let myself put into words before. It wasn't a hunter choosing its prey. It was something that fed on a single moment, and that moment had just happened twice in the same building, and it genuinely didn't know which one to take. It chose the other room. I don't know why. Maybe proximity. Maybe something in the air I couldn't read. Maybe nothing at all that made sense to a human brain trying to find logic in any of it. It crossed the doorway before I'd even gotten my breath back, moving so quickly that I caught only the impact of one shoulder against the frame, and the ceiling tiles shifting above the hall. It left nothing behind but Erlene's hand still wrapped around her husband's, and the long, flat tone of a monitor that had stopped mattering to anyone but her. Nobody came running for almost a full minute. That's the part that stuck with me longer than the cold or the smell, or the shape of it standing over Henry's bed. That you can live through something like that, and the world just keeps right on not noticing. Machines beeping their same beeps. The hallway outside carrying on with its ordinary 4 in the morning business, like nothing had torn a hole through the room at all. Then it was all noise at once. A nurse I barely knew came through the door first, saw the wrecked vitals cart, saw me bleeding through my shirt on the floor, saw Erlene sitting calm as still water with her husband's hand in hers, and just stood there a second too long trying to make those 3 things add up into a story she could work with. She called it in as a fall. I let her. There wasn't a version of the truth that was going to help anybody in that room right then, and I'd learned by that point that the hospital had its own ways of not seeing things it didn't want to see. They got me down to the ER again, second time in 2 weeks, and this time the tech who stitched me up did ask a question, just one. Rough shift? And didn't wait around for an actual answer, which I appreciated more than I let on. Henry was pronounced a few minutes after I left the room. I found that out later from Loretta, who said it plain and flat the way she said everything, no space in her voice for anything extra. Erlene stayed with the body almost 2 hours past when she should have. Past when the chaplain came, past when the on-call doctor gently suggested she might want to step out while they prepared him for the morgue. Nobody made her leave. I think by then word had gotten around enough, in whatever broken, mismatched way word travels in a building like that nobody much wanted to be the one to push Erlene Vance out of a room she'd earned the right to sit in. I went and found her the next evening, before my shift, sitting on the bench outside the chapel instead of inside it, which she hadn't done in weeks. "I'm not setting foot back in there," she said, before I'd even sat down. "Not after what I watched happen to that vitals cart. I don't blame you. I'm not scared of it anymore, if that's what you're thinking." She said it simply, no defensiveness in it, just a fact she'd already settled with herself. I watched it choose something else over Henry, over me. I don't know what that means, but it means something, and I've decided I don't have the energy left to be afraid of a thing that didn't even want what I thought it wanted. I didn't argue with her. I'd spent 2 days turning the same thought over myself, the image of it frozen in that doorway, caught between two pulls, choosing the other room for reasons that probably made all the sense in the world to whatever kind of mind it had and none at all to mine. "What was in the other room?" I asked. "You hear anything?" "An old man, 80-something, I heard. Alone, no family in yet," they said. "Just him and the machines." She looked down at her folded hands. "I keep thinking about that. Henry had me. That man didn't have anybody, and it picked the room with nobody in it. I didn't have an answer for that, and I don't think she wanted one. I think she just needed to say it out loud to somebody who'd actually been standing in the room when it happened, somebody who wouldn't try to make it smaller or tidier than it actually was. What I didn't tell her, what I still haven't told anybody until just now, putting this all down on paper this far removed from it, is that I'd gone looking for that other room's chart later, against every rule about patient privacy I'd ever been trained on, just to see the timing of it written down in black and white. 2 deaths, same building, 3 minutes apart, no connection between them at all beyond the simple, terrible fact that both of them had stopped being people in the same handful of minutes. I started thinking after that maybe it wasn't choosing anything the way I'd assumed. Maybe it wasn't drawn to grief, or to love, or to people sitting at bedsides holding hands. Maybe it was just drawn to the leaving itself, plain and simple. No preference at all for who was watching or who wasn't, and Henry's room had only ever been one of 2 doors it could have walked through that night. It happened to walk through the other one. That's all. No mercy in it, no meaning, just a coin that landed a certain way because something somewhere decided it would. That thought sat worse with me than almost anything else from that whole stretch of time. I think I'd wanted there to be a reason. Wanted to believe Erlene's hand on Henry's, her refusal to let go even with that thing standing right over them both, had actually mattered, had actually tipped some scale somewhere. Sitting with the alternative, that none of it had mattered at all. That the whole thing came down to which door it happened to be closer to. Felt like its own kind of grief, separate from anything Henry's death itself had stirred up. The hospital's facilities director, Carla Whitfield, called a meeting 2 days later with facilities and administration. Closed door, no notes taken that anybody outside that room ever saw. I wasn't invited. I heard about it secondhand from Loretta, who heard it from somebody else entirely. The way everything in that building traveled by then. Secondhand, thirdhand, never quite matching by the time it reached you. Same as it had been since the very first night the candles went dark. The chapel closed for renovation 3 weeks after Henry died, which is the kind of timing that makes you suspicious, even when nobody hands you a reason to be. Facilities put a sign on the door. Temporary closure, improvements coming soon. And by the time it reopened 2 months later, every trace of what it used to be was gone. New benches, lighter wood, bolted to the floor this time so nothing could shift out of line even if it tried. New carpet, the dark kind that doesn't show stains. The kneeler was gone entirely, replaced with low-cushioned chairs that didn't invite anybody to put their full weight down in one spot for very long. Nobody ever told me why. I asked Carla once, straight out. Caught her in the hallway with nowhere easy to walk away to, and she gave me a line about updating outdated fixtures and improving accessibility, said it the way you'd recite something you'd practiced in a mirror. I let it go. I'd learned by then that the building had its own appetite for silence, same as whatever had been living in that little room, and arguing with either one got you nowhere. Erlene stopped coming around not long after the renovation finished. Loretta heard she'd moved out toward her sister's place near Buckhannon, which made sense. There wasn't much left for her in that building once Henry was gone, and I don't imagine the new chairs gave her any reason to come back and sit with whatever memory the old room still held for her. I think about her sometimes, more than makes sense for someone I only really knew across a handful of nights, the way she said she wasn't scared of it anymore. I've turned that over more times than I can count, trying to decide if that was peace she'd found, or just exhaustion wearing peace's clothes. I never landed anywhere solid with it. Denny put in for a transfer to days about a month later, said it was for the better hours and didn't argue when I didn't believe him. I don't blame him. I think about putting in for the same transfer most weeks and never quite do it, which probably says more about me than I'd like. The strangest thing happened almost a year after Henry died, long after I'd convinced myself the worst of it had passed. The way you convince yourself of things just to get through a shift. I was helping clear out an old supply closet on the 3rd floor that hadn't been touched in years. The kind of job nobody wants and everybody puts off until maintenance finally forces the issue. And I found a logbook stuffed behind a shelf. Water damaged. Half the pages stuck together. It was from the hospital's old wing. The part torn down before I ever started working there. Going back almost 30 years. Most of it was nothing. Work orders, complaints about the boiler, a note about a leaking pipe in what used to be the original chapel. 3 buildings and 3 decades removed from the one I knew. But one entry, dated some October I'd never have a reason to remember, mentioned a smell reported in that old chapel too. Wet earth. Something gone wrong underneath it. A maintenance worker had written, in handwriting gone soft and faded with age, that he'd checked every pipe in the wall and found nothing, and that whatever it was had stopped on its own after a few weeks, same as it always seemed to. Same as it always seemed to. That phrase sat with me longer than almost anything else in that whole stretch of years. Like whoever wrote it had seen this exact thing before, had a history with it that didn't start or end with any one chapel, any one building. I never found out who that worker was. I never found another entry mentioning it again. Not in that logbook, not in any record I went looking for afterward. Though, I'll admit, I didn't look as hard as I could have. Some part of me had already decided I didn't want to find more. I think about the timing sometimes. The 2 deaths 3 minutes apart. The way it froze in that doorway, choosing between them. I've never been able to decide if that was a coincidence built on top of a coincidence, or if there's something underneath this whole hospital that just waits for that particular kind of moment. Wherever it happens to land, in whichever room, in whichever decade, leaving the same signs behind each time, even when nobody lived long enough to describe what made them. The new chapel's quiet most nights now. I walk past it on my rounds same as I always did, and most of the time it's just a room. Soft light, low chairs, nothing in the corners but the corners themselves. Most of the time. A few weeks ago I caught a smell near the doorway. Faint, gone before I could be sure I hadn't imagined it. I didn't go in. I didn't tell anybody either. Not Loretta, not the new chaplain who replaced Father Ridley after he finally retired that spring. I just kept walking, cartwheel still ticking its same broken rhythm, and told myself it was probably nothing. I just kept walking, the broken wheel of my cart ticking behind me in the empty hallway. The smell followed me as far as the elevators,